Hello, today I am presenting to you a critical evaluation of a learning activity I undertook with my students in week 7 of their module. I will use David Kolb's experiential learning structure to present to you in this short video. I will deal with the concrete experience and reflective observation from peers, students and my own reflections first, because in my timeline of events they all interlink. I will then consider abstract conceptualisation and conclude in a positive manner at the end of the video with active experimentation to be clear how I am going to use this critical evaluation to develop my teaching in the future. So if we look to set the foundations of the stage first, I have 120 students on a real estate management undergraduate degree that will set them up to qualify as chartered surveyors in the future. They are in year 2 of their studies. They are undertaking a 10 credit module with me over a 12-week course with a 2-hour lecture, with a 1 15-minute break in the middle of it, and 1 hour of seminars every week. So now if we build up to the scene itself, in week 1 I asked the students to complete a learning styles questionnaire to confirm if their style was mixed or predominantly read-write, oral, visual or kinesthetic, to help them understand how to adapt to teaching styles and help me understand a little bit more about the range of diversity in my audience. Unfortunately, only 7 of my 120 students completed this questionnaire, so it did not give me any level of significant data to analyse. In week 4, I noticed that the attention span of the group was starting to wane at important points. In week 5, one of my students approached me and asked me to change my lecture style to suit his particular learning style of visual. So in week 6, I asked my superior to attend my lecture and make sure that my style did suit the degree course itself, and I got useful feedback that gave me the confidence to establish a different structure for the lecture the following week. My superior confirmed that there was nothing wrong with my lecture style, which does fit with the style used by the majority of the lecturers during this undergraduate degree. One useful and very simple suggestion she also made was to write some of the scenarios and names of cases and legislation that are depicted in my PowerPoint slides out on the board, as visual learners can benefit from seeing me write the words, and I can reinforce the important points that way. I was keen to put this into practice as it seemed so simple and had the potential to be very effective. So if we move the building blocks out of the way, we can move on to the stage itself. I set about creating a lecture that would engage students and suit all learning styles at some point along the way. In week 7 I was teaching an abstract concept about trusts and co-ownership, and this abstract concept does lend itself to the use of props for better explanation. I brought in a curtain to show the difference between the parts of the trust that the world would see and the parts that would sit behind the curtain, only for the trustees to have to worry about. I brought in different hats for the co-owners to wear as trustees, and for them to wear when they were acting as beneficiaries, different hats. I had 3 different examples, so different students stood up for each scenario, so I could play out the co-ownership and trust to try and help the students understand the concept of trusts before we looked in detail at the trickier nature of it. I hope that the props help the kinesthetic learners. I hope that the student volunteers help the visual learners, and I hoped that also writing on the board to reinforce the point would help those learners as well. I asked questions as we went through each part of the structure of the trust to keep them all listening and to make the oral learners in particular stimulated by different voices. I kept the slides up and hoped that those and the writing on the board would assist the read-write learners, but equally hoped the new style in the lecture would challenge them out of their comfort zone that my traditional style of lecture panders to. I also changed the structure of the lecture to 2 short 5-minute breaks so that the students could refresh themselves more regularly and hopefully stay focused for more of the lecture. So what was the verdict when the reviews came in? I asked the students for feedback from week 7 up until week 8 in a different number of formats. First of all, in the seminar that followed the lectures in week 7, I asked them for general feedback in relation to the props, and overall it was positive. They thought that the props did help them to understand the concept that I was trying to teach. And in relation to the breaks, All bar 2 students said that they preferred the 2 shorter breaks. Then between weeks 7 and 8, I emailed the students that attended my lecture and asked them for specific feedback on certain points. Some of the feedback included, I found that being asked questions during the lecture did help me to think more about the subject being taught, so I thought that it was helpful to do. I think that the props did help me to understand the concepts of trusts, and I think that that will help me to remember the concept for the future. I understood more of what you were saying when you used the demonstration technique. I like the physical and kinesthetic approach a lot more than the verbal style. Having questions posed in the lectures does help me to stay focused on what is being taught. I found it good to have both the slide format of teaching and a demonstration as the mix. And then in the lecture the following week, I gained a consensus from the students that were there that actually 2 breaks was the preference. So we have changed the lecture structure to have 2 short breaks going forward. So, looking at abstract conceptualisation. Reviewing the exercise itself first of all, I want to recognise the UK Professional Standards Framework and the attributes I think this critical evaluation of a learning activity that I undertook with my students has enabled me to address. These being A1, in relation to design and planning the activity, K1, in relation to demonstrating my knowledge of how my subject is traditionally taught, K2, in relation to getting feedback from my peer that my current teaching method is appropriate and assessing other possible methods for teaching my subject, V1, in relation to questioning my teaching because of a request from one student to try and respect that student's individual needs and considering how best to teach a diverse community of 120 undergraduate students, and V3, in relation to considering research to help me develop my teaching in the future. Now considering the literature and reflecting on the students' feedback. Brookfield talks about the real benefits of peer feedback and recognises how it can help us to see our practice in new ways, which I do find to be true. Having my superior observe my lecture and affirm that my teaching style was sound gave me the confidence to think about trying to develop my style in a more diverse way now that I know it has a solid foundation. It was also extremely beneficial to get a simple but effective suggestion of writing on the board to reinforce key points during the lecture. Brookfield also makes a good point about understanding the student's perspective when he says, seeing things from their point of view reminds us of the need to constantly explain our actions. And I have found that engaging with the students and explaining to them about the different teaching styles I'm experimenting with does elicit some very useful feedback from them. I've found that feedback from the students has been very helpful. The experience of actually asking for the feedback was quite liberating in itself, and it was not as scary as I thought it would be. It has also opened up a dialogue since week 7 where students have engaged with me more and been more honest about sharing their experiences and perspectives, which is proving invaluable. I've also considered ways that I could further adapt and change my lectures in the future, and watched an interesting webinar by Simon Lego Baker where he made suggestions for creating disjuncture to get students thinking more for themselves in a large group scenario and move away from spoon feeding. I've also considered research-based learning that could be used to teach law in a large group setting after reading Varner and Webb's suggestions on the matter. One final point that Brookfield makes is that it's not possible to meet all students' needs, and in fact it's better for student development if you do not. He refers to allowing students to only work within their preferred learning style as a form of cognitive imprisonment. Whilst I can see this is helpful in clarifying why, aside from the impossibility of it, that I should not try to pander to all students' learning styles, I can also see that only using the traditional lecture style of teaching also means that some students will be stuck in the cognitive prison, so I do need to provide a variety of teaching styles to both satisfy students' needs at different times and challenge different students at different times. So, finally, active experimentation. Where do I go from here? I'm now at the end of my module with my undergraduate students, but next semester I will be teaching a small group of 20 postgraduate students and will experiment with a longer session of 3 hours, but in an interactive lecture and seminar format that requires some research before each session on their part. I hope this proves successful enough that I can persuade the undergraduate course leader to restructure my law lessons to split the year groups so I can run similar interactive sessions with the undergraduates next September.